Hello, and welcome to the Law Deals podcast, where we discuss law firm succession plans, profitable law partnerships, and law firm purchases and sales. I'm your host, Ed Alexander. I've practiced transactional business law for 30 years, have my own practice, Alexander Business Law, and I'm a principal with Fitzgibbon Alexander, a business intermediary firm. We're on a mission to make sales of law firms commonplace so you can enjoy your practice and your life. Hello, and welcome to the Law Deals podcast. I'm Ed Alexander, your host. Today, we have Patrick Wilson. Patrick is a longtime friend of mine, and he has been a coach and consultant for law firm owners for the past 25 years. He works with Atticus, a law firm that helps owners focus on what's really important in life. And his focus is working with lawyers to grow their practices while simultaneously having a great life. So I'm tapping into his wealth of knowledge so that you can walk away with things to do today to improve the value of your practice and to create a practice that you love. So Patrick, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ed. This is going to be fun. I don't know if anybody else will enjoy it. You and I will enjoy it. 25 years of friendship to draw on, but hopefully it's a benefit to your listeners.
There you go. Give us a little bit of your background. Tell me about what your journey is, because I think it's important to understand you've lived the lawyer life. And so it's not that you just came to this as a coach or a consultant. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I grew up just a short, skinny kid from a small town in the South that was the butt of jokes and was super competitive, but not athletically gifted enough to play sports for a living. So when I was in college, I thought, what do nerds do if they're really competitive? And I thought, well, you go to law school and you try cases. So I went to law school for one reason only, and that was to get in the courtroom. So I grew up in Tennessee, moved to Orlando for a job, and was doing insurance defense work because I didn't love that. I just had a good offer and had student loans to pay out the wazoo. And that seemed to be a pretty quick route to the courtroom. And I didn't care too much what kind of case I tried as long as I was in court mixing it up. So I did that for 8-9 years. And then in 1999, it was a real turning point in my career. I got into workers' comp, which was a big deal in the 90s, if anybody's old enough to remember that. And lots of people doing it, lots of money to be made in the 90s, but it's a creature of the legislature, right? It's not a common law right. And so occasionally the legislature messes with it. And I could see what was coming was that the business interest and the insurance lobby in Florida was going to kill it and get the lawyers out of it, basically, which probably needed to happen. And so I needed to retool. And I was in the midst of trying to do that and find a different practice area when I stumbled onto Atticus. And it's kind of a funny story because it was a little earlier than this. It was summertime. Summer's a long season in Orlando, but it was maybe June or July. And I went to some half-day Atticus seminar that we're doing locally. And it was on a Friday morning, and there was a tropical storm coming. I decided I was just going to go home rather than go to the office because, the tropical storm was blowing in that night. So I went to the Atticus seminar, and I'm just kind of blown away at the practical answers they have and the kind of things I had been struggling with in my own practice from a business standpoint. And they gave us 2 books. There was a great big thick binder. And then a book that's probably back here somewhere that I'm sure you've read a few times called The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber.
I love it.
And I went home and I was single. There was a tropical, sometimes the tropical storms just creep across you, don't zip on through. So it just kind of sat on us all weekend. So you couldn't go outside and do anything. So I was just kind of stuck at home for the weekend with myself and these 2 books. So I kind of read it from cover to cover. And then I've always joked I had the lawyer's equivalent of like a Pentecostal conversion. I fell to my knees Sunday night and confessed all my practice management sins. And then I called Atticus Monday morning. He was like, are you guys hiring? Right? How does this work? Because I really saw that they had practical answers to the kind of things that small firm lawyers really struggled with. And things nobody bothered to teach us either at law school or any kind of CLE, right? There was just nothing to help lawyers run their business. And I realized, man, I'm completely ignorant on this. I've got some natural people skills, so I was okay at marketing. I was okay at staffing, but time management, I was a disaster. Long-range planning and organization, disaster. Financially, not very good.
Yeah, that's the case with most lawyers. I mean, you don't get any training in that, right? So it's kind of generally, most lawyers are pretty smart people, right? And so they kind of try to figure it out. But oh my gosh, how much easier is it if you have somebody who gives you the system to implement it?
Yeah. And I resonated with it in another level. I mentioned I grew up in this small town. My dad was a pharmacist, and this is back before Walgreens and CVS had taken over the world. And so he owned a Wilson drugstore. So there were two drugstores in the town, and my dad owned one. So he was both a pharmacist and a small business owner, right? So he had the same professional business person divide that lawyers do. And he was a really good pharmacist. As a matter of fact, me and my brothers all had to work for him, throughout high school. That was just like an unspoken rule in our house. And so I worked through high school and off and on through college as a pharmacy tech, I guess you'd say now. And the pharmacist at the other drugstore twice a week called my dad for advice because he didn't know, but my dad knew. So my dad was an excellent pharmacist, but a terrible businessman. And because you don't get it in pharmacy school either. When I went to Atticus and they were giving me this distinction between the business side and the professional side, that resonated not only with my own experience, but my experience growing up is that you can be really good at what you do and simultaneously really terrible at the business behind.
So that must have hit you when you read the E-Myth. It's like, oh my God, I live this. I understand exactly what this is at.
Yeah. I was like, I wish I could fly back to 1955 and give my dad a copy.
Yeah.
Right. His life would have been transformed.
Yeah. So, all right. So this is where we first meet, right? So you reach out to Atticus, you ask them if they're hiring, and then I guess they said yes, right?
Yeah. So they were hiring, and I had been, and I don't want to talk too much about this, but some of your listeners can no doubt relate. I had been really screwed over and hosed by some law partners. And so I was sort of like somebody coming fresh off a divorce or something. I was not very trusting. And I had enough self-awareness to say that. I told Mark Powers, the founder of Atticus, I'm like, you're getting me at kind of a rough time because I don't trust anybody right now because I've just kind of been stabbed in the back by, what I thought was a trusted friend and business partner who, by the way, we had a handshake agreement, right? Because we're friends and I trusted him. So if you are operating on a handshake agreement, the next thing you need to do is hire Ed to get you a written operating agreement, partnership plan. Don't operate on a handshake.
This is great because I was just speaking with a lawyer the other day. He's a colleague, so I'm not representing him, and he's representing this partnership, and they are making multi-million dollars per year in terms of revenue, right? So they're bringing in multi-million dollars of revenue. And their operating agreement was one page. So there's not having any agreement. There's thinking you have an agreement when you actually don't because it's only one page.
Right. Yeah. So lots of people have wholly insufficient agreements, and that's another story. Yes. But we didn't have anything, right? Just a handshake because we're buddies. So anyway, I come to Atticus a little wounded by that, and so I insisted on a signing bonus, which for me was sort of my insurance policy. If you screw me over, I've already got some money, that kind of thing.
And plus, you're making a career change, right?
I'm making a career change, and frankly, Atticus was kind of a startup back then, and I was taking a pretty big pay cut to go to work for Atticus. And so it'd be interesting your recollection of it because you had the other side of this, but this is literally how Ed and I met. I think you called me because you were the attorney representing Atticus at the time, and Atticus had already hired me. I'd been there, I don't know, a few days, a week or two, and somehow in the oversight of Mark in bringing me on board, he didn't have me sign a covenant not to compete. And so they gave me one, and I said, well, I'm not going to sign this, right? We've already negotiated everything, and I've started. Surprise. You can't spring this on me after I've started. And Mark was like, well, I don't see what the big deal is. I'm like, trust me, it's a big deal, right? I'm not signing it. And so we get on the phone. I don't think they told you I was a lawyer, right? I was just some guy. So we're hiring this guy. And so you're trying to get me to sign the covenant not to compete. And I said, the key word was, Ed, where's the consideration? When I say consideration, nobody in the real world uses that term, right? I'm like, if you want me to sign this, you're going to have to throw some more thousands at me. Ding. And you said, okay, I don't think they'll do that, but whatever. 25 years later, is that how you remember it?
That's pretty my recollection. Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting. And I'll tell you this, you are self-aware of this. When somebody approaches you and you think that what they're asking you is pretty much stupid, there's a way that you approach them. So essentially, that was our first introduction was like, are you effing kidding me? But then things got better from there. Shortly after that, I actually came on board with Atticus too. And then we did a lot of presentations together and things of that nature. And we spent a lot of time together going to barbecue with Glenn and doing all sorts of stuff. Even though I think Glenn has forgotten that the four of us were kind of right? So Glenn Gutek, Glenn Finch, me, and you
Yeah.
were kind of the four people there when it was through the startup phase. So that was pretty interesting.
No, those were fun times, a little volatile.
A little volatile, yes.
But I had a blast speaking with you. If you've never heard Ed speak publicly, he's really good. And you might remember this. When you joined the team, I was like, what we've been missing is gravitas. Like we had some people that were good speakers and had, everybody was a good speaker, but you just brought some seriousness and some knowledge and some weight that the rest of us collectively were lacking.
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. Tell us, for the last 25 years now that you've been with Atticus, what kinds of firms have you worked with?
Boy, a little bit of everything, other than really large firms. The marketplace that Atticus is in is really the solo, small, and lower end of mid-sized firms. So we're not working with the King and Spaldings too much. Although I have worked with individual lawyers and departments in some really large firms, Ron Cassell and some firms like that in Florida. But practice area, a little bit of everything. As a matter of fact, back in the day, I think I was known internally at Atticus as the coach of none of the above. Meaning, if you had some sort of oddball practice that didn't fit our common practice areas of, criminal, family, PI, estate planning, that we had a lot of. If you had, I don't know, you were a municipal bond guy or had some sort of a little bit more unusual practice, right? You often wound up with me because I like the challenge of learning a new area, because you have to learn a little about the area of the law, right? So I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the challenge of figuring out, okay, how do we make these principles we have at Atticus fit in this different context? So
yeah, and I think you used to have a cadre of personal injury firms too. You did some work in that area in particular, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, and that has remained kind of a constant throughout my career. And I didn't set out that way. As I mentioned, I was a former defense lawyer. So I wore the black hat to work every day and laughed as I kicked sand in the face of widows and orphans. I'm just kidding. That's for my PI friends. But what I really enjoy is working with entrepreneurial lawyers, right? Lawyers that have embraced the idea, I also have to be a business person, and I've got a business to run here, because that's what I am. I'm a business coach or consultant, right? I'm not a legal consultant. So, and it just turns out that PI lawyers are among the most entrepreneurial types of lawyers out there on average. And so, so probably throughout my whole career, I've worked with maybe 50% PI lawyers, and even now about 50% of my clients are contingency fee lawyers of one stripe or another. And so I really enjoy that. And of course, their cash flow situation is very different. The financial end of things is very different. And so you have to kind of learn that when you're new to Atticus. And then the personalities are very strong. And so not everybody likes that. I like it because I have a strong personality. I deal pretty well with strong personalities, but it is a peculiar taste.
Yeah. That's really a big part of the value you bring, right? Is that, nobody typically, if you're an owner of a firm, nobody is typically telling you no, or why didn't you do that, right? And so, having a strong person like you be able to talk to the owner and say, hey, you agreed to do this. Why isn't it done? And then we'll get into some of the parameters around forcing people to do that. But I think that's a critical piece of the pie, as my wife would tell you too.
You're right, because the people we're dealing with are usually the decision maker. They're the boss, right? And so everybody is naturally afraid of them, even if they're a sweetheart, even if they're a very kind, soft person, they're still the boss. They can fire you. They can give you a pay raise or not. So there's always some fear of that person. And so commonly they're not stood up to very much. So dirty secret, right? If I'm sort of training and mentoring a new coach, one of the pieces of advice I give them, particularly if they are not the boldest of personalities, I said, you have to be careful about this, but in the first 3 to 6 months with your client, you need to find a place where they're wrong, and you need to punch them in the nose. By which I mean, You need to tell them in very clear terms, this is a huge mistake. Don't do it. Because nobody's probably told them that for 5 years. And at that point, one of two things will happen. Either they'll respect you because they see that you have an independent opinion and that you're not just there as a yes man, but you're there to help them do what's best for their practice. And if they're off course, that you'll give them that feedback. Or if they're an utterly insecure narcissist, they'll fire you because their ego can't stand being told that they were wrong or they're making a mistake.
Yeah, egomania.
So unfortunately, 9 out of 10 are not ego-centered narcissists. And you don't make something up, right? You don't tell somebody that they're wrong about something that they're right about. But we're all wrong about stuff, and you get into somebody's business, you're going to see mistakes they're making, but that's part of the value you bring, right? If you don't, and nobody needs a consultant to help them do what they've always been doing.
Right, right. So let's talk about that value piece, because, you have this incredible, I believe it's like a mental database of the law firm experiences. And I draw a distinction between someone like yourself who's worked with law firms, various law firms over an extended period of time. Because if you look at any data set, right, you've got points all over the place. You've got points that kind of line up and you've got outliers, right? And so understanding what's an outlier and what's not an outlier is very important, so that the advice that you take or give, right, so you're giving it, the law firm owner is taking it, really represents what's normal. And then when you have experience with an outlier, you can say it's normal to do this, but in your case, you look like an outlier. So maybe it's a little bit something different that you should do.
Right.
And I distinguish that from the situation where you talk to somebody who's been successful at one thing, and what they're really telling you is how I did it. And so the coaching and the consulting piece is so important to have that broad depth of knowledge. So I think, what I want to do is kind of delve into things you've seen, right? 25 years is a long period of time, and a lot of changes have come down. I mean, think about what the world was like in 1999. We were pre-iPhone, pre-smartphone.
Yeah.
And so
right.
Just what do you think are some of the major changes that have come up in the world of practicing law over that 25-year span?
Yeah, I mean, a handful of things immediately come to mind. Obviously, as you pointed out, technology. We're all well aware of that, but yeah, 25 years ago, there were no smartphones. Websites for law firms were kind of novel.
Yes.
If you can believe that. And there were a lot of really bad ones out there. So we helped people develop their first website. Yeah, so obviously technology and now AI is the big technology shifter. But this is one of the advantages of doing this for 25 years, is that you've seen other game-changing technologies. I'm old enough. I remember when the fax machine was a game-changing technology when I got to law school in 1991, and suddenly, you can file something by fax and it's there instantly, right? Instead of having to go through snail mail. That was like amazing. And then we got email a few years later, and that was amazing. But those things don't fundamentally change the practice of law. The practice of law at its basis is still, you have to know your practice area, the technical rules and procedures and the ins and outs, and you have to apply wisdom in your client situation. So that part, AI can't do. AI is still programmed by people, right? It's still people dependent. And so it's going to give as good answers or as bad answers as the people behind it. So is it valuable? Oh yeah, it's tremendously valuable. Just like my smartphone is tremendously valuable, right? It is going to become more valuable, and it's going to become more user-friendly as we go along.
Right. If the basis of the practice has remained the same, right, there are things around it that have changed and impacted that.
Yeah. So two other things that are more cultural have had a huge impact. One is the law numerically has become a female-dominated profession. I mentioned I graduated from law school in 1991. At my law school, I went to Vanderbilt in Nashville, where I'm from. And there was a lot of big publication at that time, because we were the first graduating class that was 50-50 male and female, right? So you walk down the halls and they had the pictures in the class of, previous graduating class. You go look at 1961, there's like 2 females, right? By 1991, it's 50-50. And now and that was a result of, I don't know what it was called in 1991, affirmative action, but an aggressive recruitment policies of minorities, including women were minorities in a lot of time. Now, without, for many years now, without trying, right, we have more female grads than male grads. And so that introduces a very different element into the workplace, where we've got more women than men practicing law. And frankly, that during the formative part of your career, for most people, if it's not a second career, right, if you were like, went to college and then to law school, or maybe worked a year or two and then went to law school, and you entered the law in your mid-20s, the first 20 years of your practice are coinciding with your fertile years, right? So women have to make decisions about, not just marriage, but babies and child rearing. And, it's not that men don't care for children, but we all know the reality. The burden falls mostly on women. And of course, they have to bear the children, right? Men don't have wombs. And so that's made career paths very different. And of course, leadership styles very different for females and males. So that's been a huge change.
And employment at
Yeah.
firms have really varied so substantially, right? So, whereas the thought that you would have somebody who was remote and working part-time and devoting their time to half their time to the children or something like that, that would have been unheard of, certainly in the 90s, but even in the mid or early 2000s.
Yeah, so I'm working with a firm on the West Coast. They've got about 8 partners, a number of associates, and so they've got 2 associates. I'm going to round the figures off just to make it simple here. But they literally went to law school together and graduated from the same law school on the same day, and then joined this firm right out of law school. So if we look at the calendar, they've got absolutely equal amounts of experience. So when it comes time for partnership selection, they look the same. However, the man, his wife just had their first child in the last year. The woman has had 3 children during that same span of time. And she's taken off a substantial amount of time around the birth of the children, and in their first year, worked really limited schedules. So if we look at the actual number of hours practicing law, as opposed to the calendar, he's way ahead of her, right?
Right.
So I think it was Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, where he said, he studied all these different fields of endeavor and discovered doesn't matter what the field of endeavor is, you've got to put in something like 10,000 hours to become expert, right? So whether you're a tennis pro or a lawyer or a surgeon or a janitor or whatever, to reach expertise, there's no shortcutting 10,000 hours. So what do you do with that, right? They're both 5-year lawyers, 6-year lawyers. Historically, that's been our track, has been based on the calendar. But in actual experience, he's got maybe 25, 30% more actual hours of practice over that time period. How do you deal with that, in a partnership track? And also she's a family first kind of person. She's a lovely person and she's a great lawyer. Everybody respects her. But at 5:00, right, she's always out the door. Good on her, right? She's a good mom. So
now you got this cultural issue going on as a result of that. Exactly.
So you have to somehow manage that in a way that is fair and equitable to everybody and, works in the workplace. And so that's increasingly there's challenges like that. And so women just have to make a whole different set of decisions than I had to make, in my 20s, because there was no possibility of me getting pregnant.
Right.
So, and I guess the other big shift I've noticed, and this one's much harder to quantify, this is purely subjective. So I can't point to data on this, but it's one of those things in my bones, I know it, that there has been a shift from the people coming out of law school where we used to have a lot more entrepreneurial, risk reward oriented people coming into the profession that wanted to go out and hang a shingle and figure it out and make it happen. And now we have a lot more people that are safety and security oriented, are content being an employee in a well-run firm. And so one of the things everybody can see the outward signs of is that there's more conglomerations, not exactly the word, but firms are getting bigger and there's somewhat fewer solo and small firms out there. And people are pointing to various economic factors driving that, sort of bigness of firms. But I think the big factor they're overlooking is whatever the value equation for law school is, has changed. And I think what's happened, particularly in the last, say, 10 to 15 years, because you remember in 2008, the economy crashed, the stock market crashed, the economy went down the tubes.
Right.
Yeah. But it was also a terrible value proposition.
It was because they had to.
Go to school for 3 years, borrow $150,000 and get out to a job market where nobody's hiring. Right. And then people were suing their law schools for the admissions department was fudging statistics. Right. So if you're a college kid at that age, you're looking at, well, why in the world should I go to law school? Right. I'm burdened with all this debt and there aren't good jobs. And so I think that and other factors that I'm sure are beyond my expertise, right, drove the most sort of adventurous entrepreneurial people into tech and into finance. So a lot of the people that maybe 20, 25 years ago might have gone to law school.
Probably the return on investment too,
Well, you don't have to get a doctoral degree to go far in tech or in finance, right?
That's right.
You can get to it much sooner and you've got burdened with less debt. Yeah.
and you could just wing it. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's, I've seen just a lot more people that are very competent lawyers, but they just want to be an employee and they don't want to assume all the risks and responsibilities of company ownership.
Yeah, that's an important distinction to make because in what we're doing with transfers and transitions, right? So having an internal sale to an associate internally, we've actually seen really good deals that associates have absolutely said, yeah, I'm not interested in being an owner. Now, if you presented that deal to me, I'd be like, holy crap, this is a windfall.
Yeah.
And you present it in a way that is almost zero risk for them, right? And they're like, yeah, I don't want the burden. Wow, that's just kind of shocking to me.
Yeah. So when you're working with clients and, the first year, you're often just, cleaning out the closet of all the mess that's there. But when you work with clients long term, and I used to keep the stat, I don't know what it is. I'm going to guess my average client's been with me 7 years. Right. So you're beyond the basics there. One of the things you want to talk about is recruiting your successor. And your successor is probably a little bit of a problematic person, right? We all want to manage the person that does what I say, the way I say it, when I say it, and doesn't give any guff about it. Right. But they're often very risk averse people that when it comes to buying you out and taking on the burdens of ownership and the risks and responsibilities of ownership, they're not so interested.
So, Patrick, to take that to the disc profile, which I absolutely love to use with clients, what you're kind of talking about is the perfect person in the firm is what an SC or a CI or an SI, somebody who basically will follow the rules, the C side of things, and either likes very steady, calm, collect, things happening the way they are, or is good with people, right? So one of those two components. What you definitely don't want is a DI in your firm because they're going to try and take over and they're going to get nothing done, right? They're going to talk to everybody all day long, make friends, and do nothing.
By the way, I'm a DI. Ed's making fun of me as he's making this point.
And I'm a DC. The point being, though, that that's exactly the person you need to come in and run the firm. And it's exactly the person that when you meet them, they are going to irritate you as an owner because they're going to be suggesting things to you. They're going to be wanting to do it their way, all of those things. So along the lines of what you're talking about, in terms of finding that successor, it's a little bit different hire than a hire for your typical associate. So how are you coaching clients through that?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of it depends on practice area. I'll pick two extremes that I work a lot with. A personal injury that I work the most with is full of DIs, right? That's the prototypical PI personalities, the dominant, hard charging, make it happen, and then the influencer, the big talker. And you can see why that trial lawyers would have that kind of personality as a general rule. Obviously, there's lots of exceptions, but we're talking stereotypes here. So for them, they all have a story where they hired a young DI and that guy left and took some clients. And so now they're burned. So now they just want loyalty, right? And so they're looking for those SCs that are not so independent, that are not so ambitious, that are happy to be their employees. But again, the problem is those people are much less apt to buy you out later on, and often are great second chair lawyers, but not often great first chair lawyers. So one of my clients is just in the midst of an ongoing conversation with one of the young associates who's shown tremendous aptitude for legal research and writing. I mean, really, really, really good. But, just kind of has the personality of a fish, just not, he's not going to ever be magic in front of a jury, right? And you just have to own that. That's just not, I mean, you can learn things, but it's like, I'm never going to dunk a basketball. I'm 5'9". It's not going to happen. Right. So you might lack some, could I jump higher? Right. Can I go to a personal trainer and do all kinds of exercise, increase my vertical jump? I'm sure I could. Right. Could this guy become a better public presenter? I'm sure he could. But does he have the underlying talent to really relate to a jury and persuade them to do stuff? He doesn't have. Right. So for those guys, they have a lot of DIs coming in. And I just say, you have to just give them room to fail, right? Don't manage them to death. Let them have some responsibility. As a matter of fact, I look back, I was just telling this to Mark Powers, the founder of Atticus. Like, I can't believe some of the stuff he let me do when I was young and kind of knew nothing. He realized I'm a guy, he can't control me to death, right?
Well, and Patrick, it's an interesting dichotomy because on the one hand, you let them go out and fail a little bit, but that's also the guy who thinks he can do everything, right? So when you approach him and say, hey, essentially, obviously would never say this, but essentially, you're my successor, they're thinking, well, why do I want to be the successor? I can do this myself. So there's this really fine line between this kind of super DI and the SC, and finding that person is a bit difficult, and then having the conversation with them.
Yeah. So with the personal injury firms, you're not going to have too much trouble recruiting some DIs to be underneath you. You just have to give them a lot of space and not manage them to death, and really bond with them personally, right? They're personable people. And if they trust you, and if they see that you're cutting them a square deal financially, they're much less likely to leave. But just know that some of them are so ambitious that they have to do things their own way and they have to leave. I was talking to one of my long-term clients a number of years ago. He would occasionally go through this thing where he wanted to bring in a partner. And I just said to him, look, you just got to get comfortable with the fact you're Napoleon. That's just who you are, right? That's not good or bad. That's just who you... Now, Napoleon served on a triumvirate for a while, right? He was ruling with 3 other people. That
Right.
whole time, he was itching to can those other 2 and just be the emperor of the
It
place,
didn't
right?
take too long. Yeah.
No, and yes, and so morals aside, he was a great emperor, right? That was who he was at his core, and that's who my client was. And I just said, look, you don't want to share power with anybody. I said, you're going to bring this person as a partner, and 3 weeks later, they're going to be mad that you ordered black staplers when they wanted blue, and you're going to pull your hair out that you're spending time arguing with your partner about the damn staplers, right? So when you just want to do it, right? Anyway, so over here on the estate planning side, you have a disproportionate number of SCs, right? Who are less risk reward oriented, more safety and security oriented. Often the founding partner is that way. And so it's much harder to find that ambitious DI person that's even in that space in estate planning and probate. So there, if you can find one, great. If not, you have to do what you were talking about, is there has to be a long-term development where you're slowly bringing them in. So like with some of my clients, I'm doing it's frankly, it's going to sound like it's more organized than it actually is, but a partnership readiness program, right? So with their associates, in your first 3 or 4 years, nobody expects you to do any marketing. But then when you want to make partner, they're like, well, you don't have any book of business. You've originated no business. You're like, what do you told me I had to?
What have you brought in? Yeah. What is it? Which do you want me
I'm
to
over
do?
my quarter billing hours right now. I'm supposed to have $100,000 worth of book. Where did that come from? Right. So I get them out there marketing and developing their own network. They've never looked at a P&L or a balance sheet.
Yeah.
Right. They're financially illiterate.
Right.
Right. And so I'm doing what the partner should have been doing or should be doing, which is training their senior associates in the business aspects. And okay, you want to be a partner. Well, here's some of the responsibilities you're going to have, and here's some things you have to learn that weren't taught to you in law school if you're going to be our partner. And so you do that in terms of bringing them into partnership. And again, just a more structured program for succession is good, and a long-term handoff is really helpful in the estate planning.
So this is an area that is I see the disasters that happen all the time in this area, right? Because we'll do the deal, and the plan from everybody at the closing table is, okay, now we're going to have partner meetings, and we're going to do the P&Ls, and we're going to do a dashboard, and we're going to look at all these numbers on a regular basis, and then interpret what they mean so we can take appropriate action. And unfortunately, that falls by the wayside. And then the whole entire succession plan becomes in jeopardy, because if the person you brought on can't understand the business, this thing's going south, right? And, it's not like when you started, right? You started the firm, you're learning as you go. It's small. You're making mistakes, but they're not big mistakes because it's small. Well, now you're handing over a fully fledged firm to somebody, and it's not learning on the job. You've got to learn before you've got to take over that job.
Right.
Yeah. So it is a crucial area. And a lot of times the succession plan can fail in that area. Now you've got people who are really good at it, who have great financial management. They bring their people on. They have a process, which is great. So that's a great service that you're offering. That's wonderful.
Yeah. I would say if you're in a partnership, a bigger partnership, a multi-partner partnership, this is a little off topic, but I'm just forcing it in here because I see it all too often, and it's really important. You have to deal with a toxic partner, right? I was on Steve Riley's podcast a while back, and he said, do you have any other topics? I said, well, I've got a million, but if the next one we should do is talented but toxic. So a true story, 10-ish years ago, I was working with a small to mid-sized firm in a city on the West Coast. And they brought me in to do a firm retreat, which I normally don't do unless I've been working with a firm for a while. But this was kind of the kickoff to my working with them as I came and I spent 3 days with them. One day in the office, just meeting all the rank and file and talking to lots of, assistants and paralegals one-on-one. And then the second day at the lawyers retreat with all the associates, and third day was just the partners. And they had 5 partners who were the named partners, and they were all, 4 of them, lovely, lovely people. 5 of them was that DI, right? Or maybe he was just I think he was just a pure high D. I don't think he had any been an I in him. But here's where personality isn't everything. There's also character, right? Self-awareness. These can be rough, but they can also be kind. Do you know how to be kind? Can you, as one of my Southern friends would say, did your mama raise you right?
It's
right?
The difference between a psychopath and a human, right? Because when you're a psychopath, you have no idea that you're hurting everybody around you.
Yeah, so there are people who either don't know or don't care that they're hurting all the people around them.
Right.
And there's people like me, like, I'm Godzilla, but I am tiptoeing through Tokyo trying not to cause any more damage than I have to. So he was not that guy, right? He is just blitzkrieging through Tokyo and doesn't give a crap if anybody's hurt in the process. But he's unbelievably good. In his city, in his practice area, he was literally the guy. He was a litigator. If you had this kind of problem, you went to go see this guy.
Yeah, so he was a brain surgeon. Yeah.
And so, but all the partners are getting kind of older. If you just plot it on a age graph, right, you got a cluster of attorneys down here in their 20s and early 30s, and a cluster up here in their late 50s to early 70s, and almost nothing in between, because people get up to partnership, and then Mr. Toxic drives them off.
Bad
and
sign.
I don't want to partner with that son of a, whatever. So this doesn't happen every day. It's happened exactly once in 25 years, but it probably should have happened more often, frankly. At the end of the 3 days, I'm sitting with the 5 partners in the room, and I say to the 4 nice partners, look, there's only one of 2 ways this meeting ends. Either you fire him or you fire me. Now, to his credit, he's a completely honest man. He has sat through an entire day of discussions and told you clearly and to your face, he is not making any changes, and he opposes every change you propose to make. He's honest. We have to appreciate that. But he's also going to kill all the changes you want to make. Right? So hats off to him for not being, one of those subtle guys who stabs you in the back, right? Yeah. But he is stabbing you in the eye, right? You see the knife coming, right? And so if you want to keep the same things the same, you don't need a consultant, right? You can do that for free, right? But if you want to make the changes you make, it would behoove you to hire me or somebody like me. But you got to get rid of this partner because he's killing, right, a lot of things, but including the succession. So not surprisingly, they fired me. 10 years later, I see on my calendar, one of the partners pop up on my calendar. Like I'm supposed to talk to him next week. I'm like, I wonder what that's about. And so I hop on a Zoom, and it was like I missed the first 10 minutes of the meeting when I hop on the Zoom. I joined the Zoom meeting, and he's just like in mid-sentence telling me what's going on. And he's a big talker. He's a great guy. He's a big talker. And I let him go 5 minutes. And I was like, well, wait. Hey, you know who you're talking to, don't you? Like, of all the consultants, have you forgotten in 10 years, right, that I'm the guy you fired? And he goes, oh, yeah. We got together. Everything you said was going to happen happened. And now we're in real trouble. And so we got panicky, and we said, who can help us out of this pickle that we're in? And they said, well, who better than the guy that told us we would be here?
Yeah. That's along the lines of what I make the distinction between long-term pain and short-term pain, right? And,
yes.
And it's easy to go with long-term pain because you don't feel it today. But invariably, the short-term pain is always the better way to go, right? So it's ripping that Band-Aid off. It's saying, some of the things, like if you think about it in terms of investments, right? The people who stick with an investment that went down, right? And, well, it might come back up, right? No, you lost the money. You just haven't realized that loss, right? The pain is there. You just haven't felt it yet. And the question is, are you going to feel a little bit of pain now, or are you going to feel a lot of pain later, right? And so any business really that you look at, but I mean, law firms in particular, they got this issue with the toxic partner. They've got a lot of other issues, right? And it's, are we working at the right technological level? Do we have the right people in the seats? We might like a person, but at the end of the day, if they're not performing where they need to perform, you got to move them on, because every minute you keep them in that spot is a minute yes, you've delayed the pain of firing them, but when you do, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it's just as simple as moving of counsel, right? So they're no longer an equity partner. They're not participating in the meetings. They're not voting. They may be a great lawyer and you want to hold on to that asset, but let's wall them off from where they're a detriment. So again, that's more character than personality, right? You'll have more DIs that are talented but toxic than you will, because the DIs they're high highs. They're great when they're great and they're awful when they're awful.
And the SCs care about relationships. They're relationship driven. So that's the helpful part of that. Good. Well, so we've talked a lot about a lot of things. I guess what I would like to do is leave the listeners with some really effective things, what I call kind of blocking and tackling type things that they can do to improve their firms and really improve their lives, right? I really focus on making the firm serve me and serve the team and serve the clients really ultimately in that order, because if that's the order that it's served in, then ultimately the clients benefit from it. So with that in mind, what would be 3 things you think that somebody should implement right away to really improve their firm and improve their lives?
Yeah, a great question. I'll start with an easy one, then I'll go to a more complicated one. Get the DISC profile for all of your employees and understand it, learn how to use it, or some equivalent personality profile. The DISC is fairly easy to understand. It's got broad applicability. There are other ones out there that are really good that I also use, but get some sort of personality tool that you can use for all of your people as a selection tool for hiring and as a management tool, as a self-awareness tool for yourself. If that's a missing piece, that's an easy one. Do that right away.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that, because we do it for everybody here. And I'm sure you've heard this before. When I like somebody and I hire them against the DISC profile for the job that we have, it invariably doesn't work. Just doesn't work. I mean, it's very accurate. And just so, I guess I should have said this earlier in the podcast, but at the end of the day, the DISC profile is a personality profile that somebody takes, and it gives you characteristics about who they are, right? Or about their personality, and their personality in a work setting and a personality in their natural setting, right? So adapted and natural. And the D stands for dominant. The I stands for influencer. The S stands for I don't know, but in my mind, it's steady.
Steadiness.
What is it? Steadiness. Okay, yes, I was right. Steady. And the C stands for compliance. And then when I look at it, compliance, I think that very systems oriented and follow the rules and such like that.
Yeah. Compliant with rules and regulations and procedures, not socially compliant.
So from that perspective, just to give a little bit of background, I would wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I don't know what we pay for ours, but it's under $100 per test, and it is absolutely worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Second thing is, law firm owners need to take a really hard look at where their time is going. And there's 2 ways I want them to look at that. The first way is around the economic value of their time. Lawyers, as it turns out, are horrible at this. Not just bad, abysmally horrible at this, which I discovered because I had a feeling of this several years ago, and I developed a tool to analyze this that I give to my clients now, where they list out the basic kind of things they do in a typical week, right? So what are the activities you do in a typical week? Somewhere between 6 and 12, right? So broad categories of things: taking depositions, doing legal research, a meeting with staff, whatever it is. And then I have them rate how much they enjoy it on a scale of 10. Like if they love it, they give it a 10. If they hate it, they give it a 1. And then I ask them to label that task with an economic value. Now, when I first ask them that, they have no idea. And so I have to distinguish between things that are important and things that are of high economic value. And those things get conflated all the time, and we need to keep them separate. So easy example is it important that we have clean bathrooms? Would you lose all of your staff if no one ever cleaned the bathrooms and they got disgusting? Yes, everybody eventually would quit, right? So it's very important. Is it economically a high value? No, it's not. How do we know it's not economically of high value? Because we don't pay custodians the same things we pay senior partners.
And we can buy it.
Right? So the fact that something's important doesn't mean you should be doing it, senior partner. The fact that something's important doesn't mean that you should be doing it. It's got to be of high economic value. And so what I found is when I get partners to list out what they're doing and come up with an economic value. And the easy way to do the economic value is, if somebody was doing this as their full-time job, what would their market value be? So for a custodian, they're making $40,000 a year, right? For a rainmaker at a big firm, they're making $1 million a year. Well, we don't want that guy capable of doing $1 million networking, spending time cleaning the toilets. Not because we don't want the toilets cleaned. We absolutely do. It's not a good use of his time or her time. And so
Right.
what I found when people analyze it, and I can't tell you how shocked I was when I was doing this, because remember who my clients are. They're not just partners in a law firm, but they're, top 50th percentile of success among partners in law firms, maybe top 25%. A third of their time is poorly spent. When I first started doing it, I was shocked to see a third of the time for really sharp people. And now I've done it with dozens and dozens of clients. And now I just expect a third of your time, you're just pissing away on something stupid when looked at from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, the crucial takeaway there, right, is like you're killing your income potential, because if you just take a part of that 1/3 of the time and apply it to those high value activities, your income is going to go right through the roof because you've already paid your expenses.
Right. Well, so here's a simple principle that everybody gets, but people don't apply. Your actual income is going to gravitate towards the value of things you do. Your actual income is going to gravitate towards the value of the things you do. So, Mr. Senior Partner, if you're actually scrubbing the toilets and dusting the furniture all day, your actual income is going to go down to a custodian's income. If you're actually out generating work all day, right, then your income is going to go up to what a rainmaker's income is. So there's a real lack of that. And that's tied into this second part of priorities and time management, which is this is the fundamental problem lawyers as business people have. If we look at a basket over here that we'll call legal stuff, right, all your case related stuff, almost everything over here in this basket is like a time bomb. It's got a due date and it's got a negative consequence immediately following that due date. So as a litigator, I think in terms of statute of limitations, file that thing 1 day late and you've committed malpractice. 1 day late, it's a malpractice. You've got a pissed off client, right? You got to call your carrier, right? Might have talked to the bar. Lots of bad things are happening. So how often do people miss the statute of limitations? Not very often, right? Let's over here in the business management side, almost nothing is like that. Almost nothing has that sort of clear due date with an immediate negative consequence, right? So if you've got a paralegal that's been coming in late too often, and maybe you told your husband, over cereal this morning, okay, I'm going to talk to Diane today because she came in late one more time yesterday and I've had it, right? And that was the last thing you said to your husband on the way out the door to your practice. And then you get to your practice and what happens? You're met at the door with the bookkeeper and she's got some checks for you to sign and some questions. And you don't immediately go talk to Diane. And then the day just gets going as the day does. And you come home that night, you're having dinner, and your husband says, hey, how did that tough conversation with Diane go? And that's the worst consequence you have, right? The judge doesn't care. The client's not mad. You don't need to call your malpractice carrier, right? So everything over here, you can just procrastinate on. And so being very disciplined to block out time on your calendar to deal with the entrepreneurial and business management things that aren't urgent, but are really important, and having the self-discipline to spend time on those really important but not urgent things, and not just 100% of your time responding to the urgencies of the law practice.
So yeah, I think the important thing that I would add on to that is the kind of time templating your time, right? So that you have that reserved, you treat it as though it were a hearing or a filing deadline or something like that. So it's inviolate on your calendar and you continue to do it. Now, I will tell you that I am if this was alcoholics, I would be in Time Management Anonymous because, I have lots of struggles in this area, mostly because it's for me, and I think for a lot of lawyers, it becomes a back and forth between I want to give good client service. And so it feels like I've got to do these things and I get pulled in that direction. But ultimately, if disengage the emotional side of my brain and I go to the logical side, right? My prefrontal cortex will say, no, you got to do this because this is, the business stuff is more important right now.
So, and the idea with the time template is you have a block of time to deal with whatever business management stuff you need to, that's just in your calendar inviolate, right? So on Monday morning, I have time to plan my week. And if you look at the year 2028 on a Monday morning, I will already have time blocked off for that. I have time on a Friday afternoon for financial review. If you looked at the year 2032, any Friday, I've already got that blocked out. So it's not a matter of me feeling like doing it or a matter of me weighing priorities. Oh, how busy am I with my client work? It's just like nobody was so busy this morning that they didn't brush their teeth before they went out the door.
Right.
I don't care how busy you were. 100% of us brushed our teeth before we went out the door to work, right? So because it's just a habit, right? You wouldn't dream of not doing it. All of us put on clothes. None of us showed up at the office naked, right? No matter how pressed for time you were, you found time to put on clothes. So you have to make these business practices habits like that. And the best way to do it is do it the same day, same time of day, every week, and put it as a repeating appointment in your calendar. And then it doesn't really matter how I feel on Friday afternoon. It doesn't matter how busy I am on Friday afternoon. I do it.
Observing the appointment.
Yeah, I'm just Pavlov's dog.
That's great. I mean, you know, to me, time management is like the keystone skill that
Yeah,
if you can get time management down and you can really have time addressed for these various different business pieces, lawyers can learn how to do the business piece, right? You'll make mistakes along the way, but it's not really that difficult. It's just a matter of putting things in place and doing them consistently, right? And so the time template and time management gets you into that consistent activity, and that builds. Ultimately, I believe a law practice is like an annuity, right? If you keep doing the same things over and over again,
correct.
it's going to build. You're going to have a great referral
Value over
source, the
time.
value is going to grow, things are going to roll. In that case, you go on a vacation for a month and you're not doing any of it. You come back and it's still rolling, right? That kind of thing. I appreciate that. I think that's absolutely
Yeah,
wonderful. So this
right.
profile plus the time template, time management, setting aside time for the business piece. Excellent. Well, Patrick, I really appreciate you taking time to be with us today. You've got something going on. A mutual friend of ours, Brian Wilson, tells me you've got an invite only event going
Thanks
on
for inviting me.
for lawyers, a group plan, group coaching arrangement.
Yeah, so Atticus has various group and individual coaching options, and you can go to our website at atticusadvantage.com and find out more about that. But yeah, I'm starting an invitation-only mastermind group. Brian was in my first one. I've only done one, but it went for 10 years, and it was great. I enjoyed it. I think the people in the group enjoyed it. And then it ended for various reasons in 2015, and then I got too busy to do one again. And then I had another one set to go, and we were set to meet in May of 2020. And then COVID hit, and so I had to shelve it.
Oops. Yeah.
So I've got one that's for more advanced practitioners, advanced from an Atticus perspective, like you've really been working on your business and you're pretty advanced. And we'll be meeting November 15th in Orlando. So if you think that you've done a lot of Atticus kind of stuff and your practice management's at a high level and you want to attend that, you can email me at patrickw@atticusadvantage.com. I'm going to be starting a second mastermind group. The thing with the mastermind is you're not just working with me. You're working with other people that are similarly situated and learning from them at the first of the year. So in January, we'll do a kickoff. And so if you're more new to this kind of thing and you're ambitious and you want to get better, but you're kind of new to the world of practice management, Atticus stuff is new to you, that might be a better fit for you. But yeah, either way, email me at patrickw@atticusadvantage.com, and I'd be happy to talk to you and see if something we're doing is a good fit for you.
The Atticus background or experience, I think, is important because Atticus, I don't know, groupies, whatever you want to call them, there's a language that we all use, right? And so we can kind of communicate like disc profile, for example, right? We all know what that is right off the top. So yeah, so definitely reach out to Patrick. I think you get a lot of value out of it. So appreciate that, Patrick. How can people get in touch with you other than the email?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not the world's most active guy on LinkedIn, but I do have a LinkedIn profile, and you can communicate with me that way. Since I'm going to be on this podcast, I promise to look at my messages regularly on LinkedIn. I'm frankly I'm a little hot and cold with LinkedIn, but really emailing me is the best way to get in touch with me, I think. And if you forget my email, then email Ed. He'll put you in touch.
There you go. I'll put you in touch there. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ed. Enjoyed it.